I'm pretty out on 996. I think the concept is wrong because it's focusing on hours that you spend in the office as opposed to the amount of impact that you have and the amount of work that you deliver. The only thing I really care about is impact. So that was obviously the thing I had to fix, was like, we need to get to a structure where there's going to be very few leaders involved. There's going to be more autonomy. The team is going to be able to make decisions.
So as we talk about vibe coding as a category, it's exploding. As you know, there are new vibe coding or prototyping tools popping up like mushrooms. And what's crazy is that they are all raising money and they're all generating some revenue.
I realized one-on-ones, I was frequently having the same conversation with a bunch of different people. So why would I have the same conversation 6 separate times? As I think about leadership principles and the approach that works particularly well for V0, it's really about solving that core problem for the team where...
Hey, this is Carlos, CEO at Product School and your host on the Product Podcast. Today's guest is Zeb Hermann, General Manager of V0 at Vercel, the leading AI cloud platform for building and deploying modern web applications. Since its founding in 2015, Vercel has become foundational to the modern web, powering millions of developers and serving brands like OpenAI, Anthropic, PayPal, Nike, and Walmart. In September 2025, the company raised $300 million in Series F funding at a $9.3 billion valuation. Zeb leads V0, Vercel's AI-powered prototyping tool with over 3.5 million unique users. V0 turns natural language prompts into production-ready interfaces, redefining how teams move from idea to code. In this episode, we dig into how AI prototyping is evolving into an end-to-end platform that lets product managers go from idea to deployment faster. How to empower PMs to deploy code without driving engineers crazy. What it takes for a product to graduate into its own business unit with a GM. And how to price AI products for sustainable growth in a market obsessed with free tokens. This episode is a masterclass in how AI native product teams operate. Fast, lean, and obsessed with impact. Let's dive in.
Hey Zeb, welcome to the Product Podcast.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm actually excited to be here because this is the Vercel office in San Francisco.
Yeah, we have a very small office, which will shortly be much bigger and better in about a month. But right now, today, the only reason we were able to get this room is that we sent 3/4 of the company to our big flagship conference. Otherwise, we'd be fighting for space.
I love it. So many things I want to talk about with you, but as the GM for V0, I first want to understand what is your product that you run and how that fits into the overall Vercel picture.
Yeah, so V0 is a vibe coding tool. I think that's the easiest way to think about it. We see literally thousands of different use cases. The first use cases we saw were people creating components for UIs they were designing, or very basic UIs like a landing page or a single page app. Nowadays, people use it to build much more sophisticated projects. And there's kind of 2 broad categories of that. One category is people like students or folks who have a startup idea or whatever it might be, people on their nights and weekends who build interesting things that are kind of experimental or the first app that they've ever created. And then the other side of it, which is much more relevant here, is a lot of product and design teams, especially bigger companies, who are kind of radically changing the way that they build products. And they're using V0 or some of these other vibe coding tools to help them prototype and express the ideas they have for how their product will evolve with a working version of what that could look like as opposed to a written document.
So V0 is one of the products that are part of Vercel, right? You are the GM for this product. And something that I'm very curious about is what it takes for a product to get that type of treatment, be considered literally a business unit versus maybe other products that are still being overseen by someone else.
Yeah. So we had many discussions about what the right structure was for this. We split V0 off into its own business unit about 6 months ago now. And we did it for basically just 2 reasons. There were many other things that were thrown around, but the 2 compelling reasons. One was that it has a different customer base and audience. When we look at the users of core Vercel, it's engineers, especially web developers. When we look at the audience for V0, it's PMs, designers, it's founders who aren't as technical. It's lots of people who traditionally would be scared of using the Vercel CLI as an example. So we realized it's just a different audience, a different customer base. And because of that, we wanted to have a different sales team, different marketing, a whole different motion around it. It made sense to split it up for that. The second reason is that Vercel is about 700 people now, and we as a company are very focused on moving quickly, but it's hard to make decisions at a very fast pace when you have 12 different leaders in the engineering organization who each can weigh in on a particular decision you're making. And Guillermo and I, the CEO of Vercel, we basically thought that the speed was critically important for V0 to compete in our market. It's a very competitive market space. And so because we saw a different customer base and because we wanted to optimize for speed as opposed to quality of decision making, we went with this general manager structure where basically we've split off a parallel marketing team, sales team, engineering, product. Everything rolls up independently for the V0 org as opposed to the rest of Vercel.
So how do you also collaborate and kind of take advantage of the fact that you also have a platform?
Yeah, it's very complicated and interesting to figure out the right way to do that. The way that we have talked about it internally is that we want V0 to be customer zero for Vercel. So we're an engineering-led organization. We have a very big dogfooding ethos, right? We want to use all of our products very extensively. And what we realized when we realized that V0 had a different audience is that it's more of an app built on top of Vercel than it's a component of Vercel, if that makes sense. So because of that, we actually have this privileged opportunity to, for instance, dog food, our marketplace APIs, or we'll probably launch at some point a Vercel billing set of SKUs, right? And V0 is independent pricing and billing, but built on top of the Vercel infrastructure there, or for things like optimizing fluid compute. V0 has one of the largest workloads on Vercel. We have many hundreds of thousands of users. And because of that, we put a lot of strain on the fluid compute product as Vercel was building it. So that's the relationship we've ended up with, where it's basically customer vendor. And because we're inside the building, we can be a very demanding customer that gives lots of product feedback to the Vercel teams that are shipping our compute products or our CDN or our billing systems.
One of the words that you used is speed. I mean, here this painting says ship. San Francisco is packed with billboards that say if the website is fast, it's on Vercel. Like, you guys really double down on the word speed and velocity. So I'm really curious to know more about what that really means for you as part of your principles.
Yeah, I think this gets into the way that product development is evolving. So I often think about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, much earlier in my career, the amount of time it took to ship like a fairly simple feature was often a quarter, right? Like waterfall development was like, now it's laughable to say that you have a waterfall development process, but that wasn't true even like 10 years ago. On the speed side, what we've realized is that especially our engineers, they can operate so quickly that the constraint is much less around do we make the right decision? Do we choose to prioritize the right feature? And more around how long does it take to make a decision, right? So as a business, Malta, our CTO, and Guillermo published a bunch of stuff about empowering people to just ship, removing an approvals-based culture and replacing it with a vetoes-based culture. But even that vetoes-based culture we saw for V0 was still too slow for the pace that the team wanted to operate on. So what we've ended up with instead is independent team. Every engineer on the team makes their own product decisions, right? We have 2 PMs, but most product decisions are made by a designer or engineer, whoever's actually shipping the code. A whole bunch of customer feedback that we automatically wire in. So people just see the complaints that are coming in or the things that people appreciate or are asking for and just operate, make changes based on those. And that system, which has almost no oversight, right, has very little like approval-based process or meetings that you go to. We have one meeting as a team, is designed just to enable the incredibly high caliber engineers on the team to ship as quickly as they can.
I want to double down on that because as a founder, I mean, I completely resonate with the idea around shipping as fast as possible, moving fast, breaking some things along the way if necessary, but having the ability to iterate fast. You mentioned waterfall. Of course, it's laughable. Agile is even laughable these days, right? It's not really that agile anymore. So now we're in this new paradigm where it seems like it's a little bit of the wild west, AI native, where an engineer is able to ship. Maybe a non-engineer is able to ship as well. So how can you operationalize that at a scale of 700 people to make sure that you still kind of work within certain guardrails?
Yeah, it's a hard problem. The and it's one that we honestly have like modified our thinking around a lot, right? So this GM structure is something we didn't have in the past, but as we've gotten bigger, you sit in these product review meetings where you have literally 10 different executives, whether it's Saparna or myself or Tomo, the CPO, or Malta, the CTO, or various different engineering leaders, all chiming in on something. And that I can tell that's not optimal, right? Like there are very few decisions we make as a company where having basically the whole EPD leadership team weigh in on that decision is optimal. But almost everything, it's not true. So what we have been pushing towards is more clear, dedicated ownership and a little bit more of the Amazon model, right? So Amazon has the STO, single threaded owners, where they try and have a single person that's responsible for a whole initiative, soup to nuts. And then they have an ethos of the connectivity points between teams should be APIs, not documents and meetings. And as we've gotten bigger, that's where we've ended up, right? And so as an example, our relationship with the Next.js team is they build Next. We always make sure that V0 is built using the most recent Canary version of Next. And then we pass tons of feedback back and forth between each other. But it's not that they need to ask our permission on the features they're building. It's more so that we just have this, we will use each other's products. We'll use just the technical incarnation of it, not some sort of written document. And then as we're using it, we will make sure that we pass back and forth lots of feedback about what's working and not working.
I mean, part of I think the advantages of your product is that it's being used by your own team, right? You're vibe coding a lot of things and using them internally to demonstrate what you are actually trying to accomplish. So I'll be curious to know some of those specific examples. Like, how do you actually dog food your own team and product so that you are in a position to then kind of offer that to your customers?
Yeah, I'll give a few different examples. One of them, which I really loved, is the second PM ever on V0, just joined a couple months ago, Juan Gabriel. He reached out to me. He wrote me a cold email in which he included a V0 link with about 10 different product enhancements that we should make. One of them was just mind-bogglingly obvious in saying it, but something that Vercel could have shipped 8 years ago and didn't, which is simplifying the login page to just show the icon for the different sign-up options or sign-in options. So why have the icon for GitHub and then the word GitHub when it could just be the icon? Obviously, people will recognize it. And various other just like simple things that made the product meaningfully better. And the experience of seeing a product person's ideas, not in a written document, for the product I spent all my time, right? But as here's the specific way it looks today, he vibe coded little tooltips that explained what was wrong with the existing thing. And then here's what it could look like in the future. Um, that was just tremendously helpful. We as a team have adopted that ethos everywhere, right? So we're working right now on substantially improving the Git sync flow, how you import things from GitHub, how you sync them back, what that whole experience is like in V0. And it's a complicated product experience. There's questions like, what do we want to represent in V0 versus what should happen in GitHub or elsewhere? What's the right paradigm for like, do we create an independent branch? Do we auto merge things? Like there's many different questions that go into it. And it's hard to think through like, what's this going to feel like? So what Ari, one of our only other PM in V0, what he did is he spent about 3 hours prototyping the whole end-to-end experience, right? And he actually worked with Pablo, one of our designers, on this as well. And the two of them like thought through, okay, here's what it's going to look like when you're first activating. Here's how I import something. We'll actually suggest the projects that you're probably most likely to want to import. And that document, which was basically a recorded video of the prototype that he built, it spurned probably 90 message Slack thread, and everybody chimed in, and people could actually feel what the product would be like 2 weeks from now when we ship it, as opposed to in the past where we'd sit around and like whiteboard it and try and explain like, well, maybe it should be this or maybe it should be that. And the upside of that is just like a lot more clarity and consistency across the whole team, because this is a project with 4 different engineers and a product person and designer. It's a fairly big team. But with that clarity of like, here's the end-to-end final version of what the product will look like.
What sounds crazy to me is that for a fairly big team, there are only 2 PMs.
Yeah, I think overall, Vercel is not a very PM-led company. When I joined, I feel like there were 3 PMs at the company or something. I've hired a few more since then, But what we found instead is that product-minded engineers, especially ex-founders, can make 95% of product decisions, and that velocity trade-off that you get from maybe making a slightly worse product decision sometimes, but being the person who both sees the feedback, makes the decision, and ships the product, that all belonging to one person, it just speeds up the team dramatically. So we've tended to hire more of these ex-founders, hire or acquire in many cases, and empower them to just make product decisions, as opposed to having a team with 1 PM for every 4 engineers or something like you might see elsewhere.
I want to talk about those potential bottlenecks in any process, right? Like back in the day, a lot of the teams would be bottlenecked by engineering capacity because they had the keys to the kingdom, and if they are not the ones pushing the green button, then the changes don't happen. Now it seems like more people have access to those keys, but still, I'm curious to know, how do you guys go about those handoffs?
Yeah. If my perfect world, there's no handoffs, right? So I push everybody on the team to submit their own PRs, and everybody on the team does. We don't have a single designer or PM or anybody who doesn't actively contribute to the product. The ratio of code push to other types of work is different depending on what seat you're in, but it's important that like Pran or other designer, she might see a flaw in some page and there's something that could be better. And the amount of time, basically wasted cycles and coordination costs in her explaining that to somebody, as opposed to her spending 15 minutes just coding up a better version of it and shipping the PR, it's much faster for that to be owned soup to nuts by a single person. So that's the approach that we try to adopt as much as possible, is just let's minimize the number of people involved in a project, minimize coordination costs, and make sure that the team is, it's kind of like the next evolution of full stack developers, it's full stack designers, full stack PMs, who each will contribute not just their product documents and prototypes, but also actual changes to the product.
Let's explore that. I think that's fascinating. Like not too long ago, finding a designer that knew a little bit of front end sounded like a unicorn. The same way as finding a PM that knew a little bit about design. It feels like you had to be an expert in one thing and maybe know a little bit of something else just to be dangerous, and that would be like good enough or great enough. Now, the way I hear you explain this new product team, it feels like everybody's kind of a builder. They need to be deep enough in so many different competencies. So I'd love to learn more about that, as well as what is the ideal kind of size, right?
Ideal size
For a pod.
For a pod? Yeah, great question. So the first one, they actually Sahaj on the team, who you might know as TweakCN. He built an open source project called TweakCN that is widely beloved. Actually, one of our competitors directly took all of his code and built it into their product as their kind of a component of their design systems feature, because it's just like the correct way to build that feature. We hired him instead. He had this amazing chart that he shared with Theo and a few other people when he was kind of in the job market that showed it was a spectrum of competencies, right? So on one end you might have design, and on the other end you might have like AI engineering or like deep ML stuff. And he had highlighted the section that he was great at, which is kind of traditional front end web dev type things, and then the pieces around it, like he has a pretty strong product sense and he's competent at back end stuff. And I think that view that kind of everybody's skill set is more of a spectrum than it is one thing that they do. That's what we've adopted. What we've seen with what you're saying around designers, I think is totally true. Like 5 years ago, a designer that was also a front end dev, it just was not particularly common. Nowadays, it's much more common, and people are very empowered because of tools like V0, right? So Pablo, the reason he works on the team, Pablo's an incredible designer, is that he basically taught himself how to code with tools like V0. He spent lots of time using them to take these ideas that he had and turn them from flat Figma files into like actual working prototypes and components. And because of that, even a few years ago, he wasn't the person merging the PRs, but now he's very comfortable with it, because this generation of vibe coding tools, it's not that they just do everything for him, it's that they've helped him deepen his technical knowledge, so that he went from the non-technical designer into the like pretty technical person who can make and does make lots of front-end changes himself.
So as we talk about vibe coding as a category, it's exploding, as you know. There are new vibe coding or prototyping tools popping up like mushrooms. And what's crazy is that they are all raising money and they're all generating some revenue. So what's your moat?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we are at, I think we're about to enter the trough of the Gartner hype cycle, if you remember that chart, right? At one point, there was, I believe, a different vibe coding startup got funding every day of the week, a recent week. Like the velocity at which they get created and funded is really wild. Our moat longer term, there's a handful of things. One, most of these markets, what you see, I used to be an investor at Square Capital, so I've seen lots of these markets evolve over time. Typically, in the early stages of a market, there is tons of investment from lots of different people. If you remember Lyft and Uber, there also were like 7 other ones. One of them was called Sidecar. I forget the names of them, but there were lots of people going after this. Nowadays, I'm sure, I mean, Waymo, maybe you could think of if you live here, but for the vast majority of folks in the US, it's just one of those 2 products, and it's probably just Uber. I think we're at that stage for vibe coding, where right now, anybody, I mean, we have an open source vibe coding template that builds you a pretty solid vibe coding tool. Anybody can create that, and we think it's great that people are creating them. We think in the next 18 months or so, there will be a couple of real winners that emerge here. I really think there's going to be 3 winners specifically. And our moat in going after that, there's a bunch of different things. I mean, today, a lot of it is because we're part of the Vercel family, we're much more secure product than any of our competitors. That's something that really matters to the enterprise. We have lots of enterprise customers that choose us because of security. The whole Next.js expertise piece is another one, right? A common thing, I read it on the Lovable forums. It just popped up on my phone today on Reddit/Lovable. The crawlers can't view my site. All of the other vibe coding tools output what's called raw React. It doesn't do any server-side rendering. So when a web crawler tries to visit that site, it's just a blank experience, right? They can't actually see any of the things that exist there. So it's kind of the exact opposite of SEO optimized. It's SEO invisible, and their users are starting to complain more and more about that. That's basically an architectural decision that they're built in such a way, they output raw React, that they can't really be SEO optimized versus V0, which out of the box we're creating Next.js applications. So we have a bunch of advantages there. Similarly, Shadsian, he's on the team. We're the best tool in the industry for outputting anything Shadsian related. And then longer term, we think it's going to be things like the quality of the generations that we produce. We do a lot of head-to-head testing for if we give the same prompt to Replit or Lovable or Bolts or whatever, and V0, how do they perform? And we pride ourselves on always being first or second, occasionally second there. We think longer term, that's going to be a real differentiator. And there's a huge amount of AI engineering work that goes into taking like this solid output that anybody can get to with this open source vibe coding template and turning it into kind of a best-in-class vibe coding tool like a V0.
What is the criteria that goes into best in class? Meaning, is it the quality of the code? Is there any taste component associated to that?
Yeah, taste is a huge piece of it, actually. Theo, the streamer, he recently did a comparison. I think he used like 15 different vibe coding tools, and he did a tier ranking for each of them. And V0 was the only one in the S tier. A lot of it is honestly design. People want beautiful designs. They want things that are delightful and also that actually work, right? Some people will output, here's a page and it has buttons, but the buttons don't link to anything. As an example, that's like fairly challenging. People don't tend to like that. So design quality and then like product quality is how I would think about it, which is like, does the app actually run, right? Like one of the metrics we spend a lot of time measuring and improving is of the code that we try and run in the preview, we call it. Basically in V0, you can see the application that you're building. What percentage of the time does that not work, right? And it turns out just having the code actually run, like you see users all the time using V0, but also every competitor's product complaining about, I tried to do this thing and it just crashed or nothing showed up, or I can't even see my application. So those are probably the 2 biggest axes we see. General product quality, like do the buttons work? Does the thing actually render? And then design quality, is it beautiful? Does it feel innovative and interesting? Is there no purple gradients on the page?
One of the common limitations I see in prototyping vibe coding tools is the fact that they tend to work really well in a demo environment, but then it's harder to put them into production, right? So I want to talk about those limitations and how you're thinking about expanding your product.
Yeah, this is the number one feedback that we've been hearing from our enterprise customers in particular lately, right? And the PMs. I gave a talk at a product leaders conference about 4 months ago and talked about prototyping, and something like 15% of the audience was thinking about it. I gave a very similar talk 3 weeks ago, and I asked the audience, how many of you have adopted prototyping and how your product teams work? And something like 95% of the audience raised their hands. So that change has already happened. Like, it happened in literally months. Mind-boggling how quickly that happened. What all those people are struggling with now is the prototype to production gap, right? And so what they want is to be able to take this thing that their PM, like the PMs at eBay, built this incredible new experience for what's it like to shop for cars on eBay. And they prototyped it, they used V0, incredibly comprehensive and beautiful, but actually getting that to production is a full rebuild, candidly. And that's true not just for our product, it's true for almost every one of these vibe coding or prototyping tools. So what we're betting on instead is that people are going to want to start from the actual code of their application, right? So we think it's the same audience of PMs, designers, founders, marketers that want to be able to work in a V0 type experience, but that those people want, like my pricing team, I was just talking to the Vercel pricing PM who wants to make a change to the pricing page. And he wants to just open that page, the specific repo in V0 and modify it there, right? That obviously should be possible. And that's something historically we haven't supported, but we think if the Stripe PM that's iterating on the Stripe dashboard or the Stripe fraud experience, if they're actually working from the repo that describes the front end of that experience and modifying it, the usability of what they come up with is much, much higher. So that's one of the big bets we're making there. The second one is around design systems. So another challenge in these vibe coded prototypes is that they don't use the right components, the right design language. So for customers like Mercado Libre or many others that I can't say, but great customers, they've developed over the years these sophisticated libraries of components and then a whole set of instructions for basically a manual for how to use their design system. Our competitors largely allow you to do some stuff to like theme your generation, right? So if you're McDonald's, you can have the McDonald's colors. We're very excited about some imminently shipping product that allow you to actually just take all of those components you have and all of that internal context and feed it to V0 and have it output design correct versions of the thing that you're creating. And that again just increases the reusability of the code dramatically, right?
I'm drawing so many connections to other products that I'm familiar with. So back in the day, A/B testing tools like Optimizely would allow non-developers basically just go into the production environment and tweak a few things to run experiments. And in some cases, marketing teams would use it to tweak copy directly, right? It's kind of skipping the engineers. That created a lot of problems, but it was kind of the early versions of like empowering others to just go straight to the production environment. But as I hear you talk about design systems, like I think Figma also kind of evolved from like the classic whiteboarding into now creating design guardrails for non-designers in this case. So I want to kind of send that back to you and see like how are you thinking the conversion of some of these capabilities that we saw in different tools as a way to have an end-to-end platform that allows, in this case, non-developers to really be more involved in the process.
Yeah, I am not the biggest Optimizely fan. We refer to many of those tools that basically do client-side like overrides as client-side slop. They typically make the application far less performant, right? So there's been a bunch of cases of that that generation of A/B testing tools that made the apps that were running them up to twice as slow. And if all the Vercel billboards talk about the importance of speed, and you see in e-commerce and travel and all these industries, the difference between the 1.5 second load time and a 2.5 second load time is hundreds of millions of dollars for your business. I think that kind of wave one way of doing things didn't win because there were too many performance considerations that like negatively impacted the teams that tried to use them. I do think that the the future that we're very shortly arriving into, it's even happening today for many of our customers, is that same flexibility. We think about it as like broadening the universe of who's a developer, right? In the same way that Pablo went from a designer to more of a designer and a developer both. We think that tools like V0 can move us from a world where there's 30 million developers to 50 million a couple years from now to 100 million a few years from after that. And what that means is that they'll actually be changing the production code as opposed to a client-side override, like what you talk about with a Mutiny or Optimizely or any of that kind of genre of tools. And as they're doing that, they typically learn way more about how the application actually works, right? Which is something that I love as a technical person, just broadening the universe of people who understand how web technology and how sites and apps actually work. I'm much more excited about that than I am creating some sort of client-side override that allows somebody to tweak the colors,
Totally.
but totally nukes performance.
Well, since you are the GM for V0, I want to talk about, and you mentioned pricing. I want to talk about pricing, money in general. How do you go about pricing your product, given that some of the capabilities are related to AI? So it's kind of unclear what's going to be the real usage.
Yeah. Pricing AI tools is very hard. And I would say there's two specific reasons that it's hard. One is that the costs of the frontier models are very high, right? So if you look at Opus as an example from the Anthropic team, you could easily, at Vercel, we had a single engineer who was running a bunch of agents just for his own work that he was doing using Opus. And in 1 month, he spent more than $60,000 on Opus. That gives you the magnitude of how much money you can easily burn through on these models. So your pricing model needs to be aware of that, or you will just inevitably, if you have a product that people actually use, be underwater. We realized that maybe a year ago, and then it took us a few months to actually ship an updated pricing model. What we have right now, we think is basically the correct model to get to, which is you charge a per seat fee for anybody that logs in and builds things. Ideally, viewers and folks who are just like interacting with a prototype somebody else built are free. And then you charge people, that seat comes with some amount of included usage, and then you charge people for usage on top of that. And you just charge them for the specific tokens that they use, and it's basically at the cost that they could buy them from anywhere else, because the tokens are more or less undifferentiated. It's the seat and the product itself that's more differentiated. We think that's the right place to get to. The second challenge is we're talking about the number of the amount of venture funding and new startups in this vibe coding space. There's always somebody giving it away for free, right? As you saw, Cursor had to roll back how generous their policies were because they were selling tokens for $100 and it cost them $200 and you can't build a business to it, right? Similarly, Claude Code had to reduce their things. Replit and Lovable have both increased prices over time because you can't build a sustainable business when each customer that brings in $20 or $100 costs them more than that. But if you're a new startup, you can. So that's the challenge, is that there will always be this new wave, or right now there's literally hundreds of these companies, many of which have $10 million, $15 million, $20 million, and all they care about is getting users. So they'll often not charge for tokens on this bet that if they get the usage, they'll be able to monetize those folks later. So that puts a lot of pressure on the other folks in the industry like V0 that is more just selling our tokens at cost, because if you as a consumer can use this random other tool where you pay $20 and get $10,000 worth of tokens, that's a better trade than using V0 where we're going to charge you for the actual market rate of those tokens.
But I would also argue that larger players like you in this case could also use the same strategy to kind of take some of those smaller players out of the game, like Amazon did that, right? Like I'm assuming I'm going to take a loss on certain services because I'm willing to monetize in other ways. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I kind of hate that companies do that. I think Amazon is a company I admire pretty greatly, but the anti-competitive side of doing things like pricing below the market is not something I would want to emulate or copy. I think we have a value at Vercel for the web. I think about it generally as just like do the right thing for the world and for other people. So I'm more excited about building the right product and the right pricing model, even if it puts more pressure on my team to be excellent, right? And I think that we can, and we see it from our users, right? We still have hundreds of thousands of users, despite not being the free option in the market or the cheapest one, because people want higher quality outputs. They want more consistency. They want better connectivity. They want better security, whatever the things they want are. So generally bearish. I'm down on companies like Amazon. I don't think Amazon does this as much anymore, but big players throwing their weight around to undercut the market. And I'm much more excited about putting pressure on my team to build a product that is so good that people are willing to pay the extra hundreds of dollars per month because it's so much more valuable.
And about the edge cases, you mentioned one of your engineers spending a ton of credits on cloud code. How do you think about that? Like I see the idea of having a hybrid pricing model where you charge like a fixed fee per seat and then there's some sort of variable component based on usage. It's in order to prevent abuse, either for you to lose money or at least for the client to be aware of, hey, there is like a extra use here, and like kind of give them the option to decide if they want to continue using that or at least kind of raise their hand and be like, wait, sorry, this was a mistake.
Yeah, in our product, we built it. I think the only reason that was possible is because we are on an enterprise contract for Cloud Code. And so they never had to think about their credit card getting pinged. In V0, the only way you can add credits, you don't pay in arrears for credits, you pay in advance, right? So you hit a limit, you've used your $30 of included credits for the month. And then it says, do you want to buy more? And you buy them. And most of our users set up an auto top up. So as they're doing that, they say, hey, I want $50 in credits. And anytime I get below $3, give me another $50, right? That model where their credit card is charged and where it notifies them in the app each time they use more, I think is the most customer friendly way of doing this. Anything else, especially where you fully charge in arrears, I think people get these runaway bills and they don't realize they're just coding something and then they come back and it's a $1,200 bill.
Totally.
Very frustrating.
It happened to me with Amazon, AWS, right? Like sometimes you get these crazy bills and it's unclear how much business ROI that bill drove. Because on the opposite, like if I'm paying a variable fee to Stripe for every payment that I collect, that's fine. Like I'm gaining money, I'm giving a piece. But when you're talking about compute, it's unclear how that compute is actually transferred into ROI.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's, for compute and for bandwidth, those two very frequently, it's because like I've seen so many stories of runaway builds, especially in the serverless world. It's very frequently because you misconfigured something, you pushed bad code, or you got hit by a bot or some other sort of malicious attack. So almost always it's just throwing away money, right? I think with AI tokens and building things, developing things, it's less frequent that it was totally trash, right? If I get hit by a botnet and it uses $1,000 of bandwidth data transfer costs, there's no value to me. My site probably got slower. Everything about it is very negative. But on the other hand, if I'm using V0 and I spend $1,000 on credits, those customers have usually built very sophisticated applications or prototypes or have hundreds of different chats where they're exploring different ideas. So I feel like it's less common that they'd look back and say, I spent $1,000 and I got nothing, than in the case of AWS and compute.
So as we wrap up, I want to switch gears and talk about your leadership style. First of all, how many direct reports do you have?
I'm not sure, probably 9. The team as a whole is about 50 people. There's about 18 people on the like enterprise go-to-market side. With the product market fit we have with larger enterprises with V0 is unbelievable. So we have a number of folks who spend time with them, help them use the product, etc. We have a small evangelism team is what we call it, which is what we think is like the right type of marketing for these types of products. It's more about lifting up people in the community who are building cool things and empowering them. We have a whole ambassadors program. And then the engineering product design team is about 30 people. So that's the organization that I have. And on the leadership side, a lot of what we think about is, again, speed. And then it's like, what do people want when they're working? So when I took over, I talked to all the people on my team, obviously, as a new GM of it, and asked them what was frustrating for them. And the most common complaint that I got is we get blocked from shipping things because we go to these meetings where there's a bunch of different leaders and everybody's chiming in with ideas and we just don't know what the final conclusion is and we're stuck, right? So that was obviously the thing I had to fix, was like, we need to get to a structure where There's going to be very few leaders involved. There's going to be more autonomy. The team is going to be able to make decisions. And that's that as I think about leadership principles and the like approach that works particularly well for V0, it's really about solving that core problem for the team where we know the caliber of the team is very high. We know their decisions are quite good. And we know that even if they're wrong 15% of the time, if they ship twice as fast, it's going to work out in aggregate, as opposed to if we do these lots of meetings and we get to 90% correct decisions, but slower shipping velocity, we think that trade is going to be much worse for the team.
I know that you and I are not fans of one-on-one meetings. I'd love to learn more about your rationale.
Yeah. I was taught, I'm sure you were taught this early in your career, right? Like everybody does one-on-ones. Manager handbook is all about weekly one-on-ones, and you put them on a day, and you have one-on-one is for the employee, all this stuff. I have spent time with a number of excellent leaders that I admire, like Doug Leone is a good example at Square Capital, or we were just talking about Brian Chesky not doing one-on-ones, or Guillermo here doesn't do them. And very few of them do this, like the manager handbook 101 style of leadership. I kind of independently came to that same conclusion when I realized one-on-ones, I was frequently having the same conversation with a bunch of different people, right? So why would I have the same conversation 6 separate times when we could just have all those people in a room or a huddle or on the Slack message and just talk about it once? And then 2, the amount of time I needed to spend with a person was very different depending on where they were in their time at the company or depending on what they were working on. So as an example, Juan, when he joined, new PM and new to V0, hadn't worked in the developer tool space before. I spent a huge amount of time with him in his first 6 weeks to help him get up to speed, answer questions, talk through different projects he's working on. But now that he's up to speed, I can spend very little time except when it's pertinent to a project. And in that case, why would I talk about it one-on-one with him when I could talk about it with the pod that's working on the project, right? Like, let's do a meeting about solving the issue, not a meeting that's about your and my feelings towards each other.
So if I were to zoom into your calendar, what would be those main things in terms of how you structure and allocate your time?
I try and keep my calendar as free as possible. We do a lot of unplanned meetings, right? So something will come up, a customer issue or an idea that somebody has or whatever it is, and we just do a Slack huddle or somebody sends a Zoom invite or obviously an incident. You're not going to plan your incidents. They just come up when they do. So my calendar, I strive to have 3 hours or less per day scheduled. And the rest of it is this organic time that gets eaten up by lots of other things. On my calendar, there's customer meetings. There's our one team meeting each week where we talk about priorities for the different pods and basically just spend half an hour giving each other visibility into what key ships are upcoming or what obstacles we're running into. And then there's a lot of time with various different people in data functions. I obviously spend a huge amount of time looking at various different pieces of data. And what I found is being with a person who is an expert in that, whether it's Christy on the kind of product analytics side or Kate is my finance person, is unbelievable. The two of them spend 10s or 20s of hours each week just in this one product space. And spending a half hour 2 or 3 times a week with the expert in that data, just drilling into what are the trends you're seeing? Let's go into this graph. What are the like places in the business we don't understand things well enough? That is incredibly valuable. So those are the general shape of what I spend my time on.
How about recruiting?
Recruiting is up and down, right? So before I hired Rahul, who runs engineering for V0, I had something like 4 meetings per week with VP candidates, which most of them are 45 minutes to an hour long. I had twice a week stand up with the recruiting team for that. Just basically, it was half of my schedule was just recruiting. Nowadays, I have functional leaders in most of the areas, and my recruiting schedule is much more. After this meeting, I have a final kind of cell call with a candidate. I'll do those, and I'll have last round interviews. But it went from 50-60% of my time to now it's around 10%, much more manageable.
And in terms of kind of work-life integration, I would say, and we are in Silicon Valley, there's a lot of talk about the 996 and how important it is to work hard. And as a founder, don't get me wrong, I know what it is. But I'm also curious to know, what is that culture like for a company that is growing so fast? What's kind of the general expectation?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've talked about this a number of times with my team. What I've seen is that I'm pretty out on 996. I think the concept is wrong because it's focusing on the hours that you spend in the office as opposed to the hours, not even the hours, the amount of impact that you have and the amount of work that you deliver. I care drastically. The only thing I really care about is impact, right? Our whole performance review culture is around this, but independently, it's when I hire a new person, it's, hey, what in your first week, I want you to ship something. In your first month, I want you to have made tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars in impact in business impact by fixing some sort of product issues that cause our customers to drop off or that cause people to be frustrated. And in your first year, I expect you to have delivered millions of dollars in impact. That is the compass that I think about. When I look at the people who have the most impact, they do work a lot, right? Like I work a typical work day. I usually start at 7:30. I have a young daughter, so I try and wrap at 5 to be able to do dinner and bedtime with her. And then there's a bunch of us who are just working nights also, right? But I want that to come from people being genuinely excited about their work and then thinking about how can we better serve our customers and how much impact can I have, as opposed to I'm supposed to sit in my office from 9 to 9 X number of days. I've seen so many cultures like that, like in New York, where all of these bankers are sitting there doing basically nothing because that's the expectation. And I would hate for that to be the culture that evolves on my team.
Zeb, I loved spending this time with you and learning from you. Thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thank you, Carlos.